Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Deputy Sheriff Elena Vasquez, and I patrol State Highway 83 between Uvalde and Crystal City. 147 miles of two-lane blacktop cutting through some of the most isolated country in South Texas. Most nights I might see a dozen vehicles total. Truckers heading to the border, ranchers driving home from town, the occasional tourist who took a wrong turn somewhere. But 3 months ago, I started noticing something that made my gut twist every time I thought about it. It began with the cars. Highway 83 isn't exactly a major thoroughfare. It's what we call a farm-to-market road, connecting small communities and providing access to the ranches that dot the landscape. During the day, you get regular traffic, local folks going about their business. But at night, especially after midnight, it's different. The highway becomes a river of solitude, flowing through darkness broken only by the occasional porch light or the distant glow of a city. That's when I started seeing them. The first one was a blue sedan, late model, maybe 3 or 4 years old. Clean, well-maintained, the kind of car a businessman might drive. I spotted it around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night, parked on the shoulder about 30 miles south of Uvalde. Hazard lights flashing. I pulled over to check if the driver needed assistance. The car was empty, keys in the ignition, engine running, driver's door standing open, but no sign of the owner. I called it in, ran the plates. The car belonged to Marcus Chen, a software engineer from San Antonio. No warrants, no red flags, just a guy who'd apparently abandoned his car in the middle of nowhere. Probably went to take a leak and got lost, Sergeant Morrison said when I reported it. You know how city folks are, can't find their way around in the dark. I searched the area for 2 hours, called out, used my flashlight to check the mesquite brush on both sides of the highway. Found nothing. The next morning, a tow truck hauled the car to the impound lot. We put out a missing person bulletin on Marcus Chen. His family was frantic. Said he'd been driving back from a business meeting in Laredo, should have been home by midnight. We never found him. 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time, it was a red pickup truck. Ford F-150, about 10 years old, but in good condition. Same scenario. Parked on the shoulder, engine running, driver's door open. No sign of the owner. The truck belonged to Janet Rodriguez, a nurse from Eagle Pass. She'd been driving home from a double shift at the hospital. Last anyone heard from her, she'd called her husband around 1:30 a.m. to say she was about an hour out. We found her truck at 3:15 a.m. This time, I wasn't alone. Deputy Williams was with me. He'd been patrolling the northern section of the highway. We both searched the area thoroughly, found nothing. But Williams noticed something I'd missed with the first car. Elena, look at this. He was crouched beside the driver's door, shining his flashlight on the pavement. What is it? Footprints. In the dirt beside the road. I looked where he was pointing. There were indeed footprints, but they were strange. Too many of them, and they seemed to circle the truck rather than leading away from it. Like someone was walking around the vehicle, Williams said. Or multiple people. We took photographs, made measurements. The footprints were from at least 3 different people, maybe 4. Work boots mostly, but one set looked like sneakers. Family members? Williams suggested. Maybe she had car trouble, called for help? But Janet Rodriguez's family said she hadn't called anyone, and her cell phone was still in the truck, fully charged. The third incident happened a month later. White minivan. Soccer mom special, complete with stick figure family decals on the back window. Engine running, door open, no driver. This one belonged to Patricia Morse, a teacher from Catula. She'd been driving home from a school board meeting. By now, I was expecting it. The empty vehicle, the circling footprints, the complete absence of the driver. But this time, there was something else. Patricia's purse was still in the van, wallet intact, credit cards and cash untouched, but her driver's license was missing. Just the license. Everything else was there. I called Sergeant Morrison. "We've got a pattern," I told him. 3 vehicles, 3 missing persons, all on the same stretch of highway. Could be coincidence. Could be, but I don't think so. What do you think it is? I think someone's hunting. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Elena, that's a serious accusation. You have any proof? Just the pattern, and the feeling that there's more to this than random disappearances. Feeling isn't evidence. No, but it's enough to request additional resources. I'll see what I can do. 2 days later, I was partnered with Detective Ray Holbrook from the state police. Ray was a veteran investigator, 23 years on the force. He'd seen everything from drug cartels to serial killers. "Tell me about the highway," he said as we drove south from Uvalde. 147 miles of mostly nothing. Ranches, scrubland, a few small communities. Traffic is light, especially at night. Perfect hunting ground. That's what I was thinking. Pattern suggests they're targeting lone drivers, people who won't be missed for hours. All 3 disappeared between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., all on weeknights when traffic is lightest. Any connection between the victims? None that I can find. Different ages, different occupations, different cities. The only thing they had in common was driving this highway alone at night. We spent the next week patrolling together. Ray wanted to get a feel for the area, understand the geography and the rhythms of the road. "Lot of places to hide a body out here," he said as we drove past miles of empty ranch land. "Lot of places to hide anything. You think they're dead? I think they're gone. Whether that means dead or something else, I don't know." On our 8th night together, we got our answer. It was 2:47 a.m. when we saw the car on the shoulder. Gray sedan, hazard lights blinking. The pattern was exactly the same. Engine running, door open, no driver. But this time, we were ready. Ray had positioned himself about a mile south of where the car was parked. I approached from the north. We were in constant radio contact. "Elena, you seeing anyone?" "Negative. Car appears empty." "I'm moving in from the south. Keep your eyes open." I parked about 50 yards behind the abandoned car and got out. Drew my weapon and approached carefully. The car was a rental. Hurt sticker on the back bumper, Arizona plates. I could see a briefcase in the back seat and what looked like a laptop bag in the passenger seat. "Ray, we've got a rental car. Probably a business traveler." "Copy that. I'm about 200 yards out." I reached the driver's door and looked inside. Keys in the ignition, cell phone in the cup holder, but no driver. That's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood freeze. Low, rhythmic, almost like chanting, coming from the mesquite brush on the east side of the highway. "Ray, I've got something. Voices, east side of the road." "On my way." I followed the sound, moving carefully through the brush. The voices were getting clearer, multiple people talking in low tones. Then I saw the light. A campfire, about 100 yards from the road, and around it, figures. 4 or 5 people sitting in a circle. "Ray, I've got visual. Multiple subjects around a campfire." "Elena, be careful. I'm still about 5 minutes out." I moved closer, trying to get a better look. The figures were dressed in dark clothing, faces hidden in shadow. But I could see something else now. Someone was lying on the ground in the center of the circle, not moving. "Ray, I think we've got a victim down. I'm going to need backup." "Elena, wait for me. Do not engage until I get there." But I couldn't wait. The person on the ground might still be alive, might still have a chance. I keyed my radio to silent and moved closer. The figures around the fire were talking, but I couldn't make out the words. The language sounded wrong. Not Spanish, not English. Something else entirely. I was about 30 yards away when one of them stood up. He was tall, maybe 6'3", wearing what looked like a long coat or robe. In the firelight, I could see his face clearly for the first time. It was the most ordinary face I'd ever seen. Middle-aged, clean-shaven, the kind of face you'd forget immediately. But his eyes, even from 30 yards away, even in the flickering light of the fire, I could see his eyes, and they were looking right at me. He smiled. Then he said something to the others, and they all turned in my direction. That's when I ran. I crashed through the mesquite brush, branches tearing at my uniform, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Behind me, I could hear them moving. No shouting, no pursuit calls, just the sound of people moving through the brush with purpose. Ray, I need backup now. Elena, what's your location? East of the abandoned car, maybe 200 yards. They made me. They're following. I broke through the brush and ran for my patrol car. The engine was still running. I'd left it that way in case I needed to move fast. Elena, I can see your car. I'm about 30 seconds out. I reached the patrol car and jumped in. In the rear-view mirror, I could see figures emerging from the brush. 5 of them, moving in a line like they were conducting a search. But when they reached the road, they stopped. Just stood there, watching. Ray's car appeared around the bend, emergency lights flashing. He pulled up beside me and jumped out, weapon drawn. Where are they? I pointed to where the figures had been standing, but the road was empty. They were right there. 5 of them. Ray scanned the area with his flashlight. I don't see anyone. We searched for 2 hours. Found the campfire, still warm, but no sign of the people who'd been around it. And no sign of whoever had been lying in the center. But we found something else. Driver's licenses. Scattered around the fire pit like playing cards. Marcus Chen, Janet Rodriguez, Patricia Morse, and 12 others. Jesus Christ, Ray whispered, collecting the licenses. How long has this been going on? I did the math in my head. 15 licenses. If the pattern was one disappearance every 2 to 4 weeks, at least 2 years, maybe longer. And we're just now noticing? Highway 83 covers 3 counties. Easy for things to fall through the cracks. Ray was photographing the scene, collecting evidence. But I was thinking about the man who'd smiled at me. The ordinary face with the extraordinary eyes. Ray, we need to expand the search. This isn't just about missing drivers. What do you mean? I mean we're dealing with something organized. Something that's been operating for a long time. The next morning, we called in the Texas Rangers. Sergeant Martinez arrived with a team of investigators and crime scene technicians. 15 victims that we know of, Martinez said after reviewing our report. Could be more. How many more? I asked. Hard to say. We're checking missing person reports across South Texas. So far, we've identified 23 people who disappeared along rural highways in the last 3 years. All drivers. All lone travelers. People driving at night through isolated areas. Martinez spread a map across the table. Red pins marked the locations where vehicles had been found. The pattern was clear. A rough circle covering about 5 counties with Highway 83 running right through the center. They're working a territory, Martinez said. Selecting victims, taking them somewhere, then disposing of the evidence. Except for the licenses, Ray pointed out. Trophies, proof of their kills. What about the ritual aspect? I asked. The fire? The circle? Martinez looked grim. We've seen this before. Not exactly the same, but similar. Groups that organize around shared interests. What kind of interests? The kind that involve taking people who won't be missed right away. That afternoon, we set up a task force. 3 counties, multiple agencies, all focused on Highway 83 and the surrounding area. The plan was simple: increase patrols, set up checkpoints, make it harder for them to operate. But I knew it wouldn't work. These people had been operating for years without being caught. They were too smart, too careful, and they knew the territory better than we did. The first checkpoint was on Highway 83, about 10 miles south of Uvalde. We stopped every vehicle, checked IDs, asked questions about destinations and travel plans. In 12 hours, we stopped 47 vehicles, found nothing suspicious. The second checkpoint was 30 miles south. Same result. But on the third night, something changed. I was working the northern checkpoint when a call came through on the radio. "All units, we've got another abandoned vehicle. Highway 83, mile marker 67. That was between the two checkpoints, right in the middle of our surveillance area. "How is that possible?" Ray asked when we arrived at the scene. The car was there. Blue sedan, engine running, door open. Same pattern as all the others. But this time, there were no footprints in the dirt. No sign that anyone had been near the vehicle except the driver. "It's like they just vanished," Ray said. I was thinking the same thing, but I was also thinking about something else. "Ray, what if they're not taking people from their cars?" "What do you mean? What if the people are leaving voluntarily?" He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Elena, these are missing persons, victims. Are they? Or are they something else? Such as?" "Recruits." We found the answer 2 nights later. I was patrolling alone. Ray was working the southern section when I saw headlights in my rearview mirror, a car coming up fast behind me. I slowed down to let it pass, but it didn't. It just followed, maintaining a steady distance of about 50 yards. I sped up. The car matched my speed. I slowed down. The car slowed down. After 5 miles of this, I decided to pull over and see what the driver wanted. The car pulled over behind me. I got out of my patrol car and walked back. The driver's window was down, and I could see a face in the dim light from my flashlight. It was Janet Rodriguez, the nurse who'd disappeared 6 weeks ago. "Officer Vasquez," she said calmly. "We need to talk." I drew my weapon. "Ma'am, you're going to need to step out of the vehicle." "That won't be necessary. I'm not here to cause trouble." "Janet Rodriguez, you're listed as a missing person. Your family is worried sick." "My family thinks I'm dead. It's better that way." "What do you mean?" "I mean I've found something better than my old life. Something more meaningful." "Where have you been for 6 weeks?" "Learning, growing, becoming part of something larger than myself." I kept my weapon trained on her, but she seemed completely relaxed. No sign of distress or coercion. "Janet, are you here voluntarily?" "Of course. We all are." "We?" "The family. The real family." "What family?" "The one that accepts us for who we really are. The one that understands our true nature." I keyed my radio with my free hand. "Dispatch, this is Unit 23. I need backup at mile marker 84. "Officer Vasquez," Janet said, "you don't understand. We're not the victims here." "Then what are you?" "We're the solution." That's when I saw the other cars. 3 of them, pulling up behind Janet's vehicle. No headlights, moving in complete silence. People got out. 5, 6, 7 of them. Walking toward me with that same calm, purposeful stride I'd seen at the campfire. "Elena," Janet said, "you've been alone for so long, working these empty highways, dealing with the worst of humanity. Wouldn't you like to be part of something better?" "Stay back!" I shouted, raising my weapon. But they didn't stop. They just kept walking, hands visible, no weapons, no threatening gestures. "You can't shoot us," one of them said. A man I recognized from a missing person photo. Marcus Chen, the software engineer from San Antonio. "We're not criminals. We're not threatening you. You're supposed to be missing, dead, We were dead, Marcus said. Dead inside, dead to ourselves. But now we've found life. What kind of life? The kind where we matter, where we serve a purpose. What purpose? Janet stepped out of her car. Recruitment. Recruitment for what? For the family. For people like you who are lost, alone, searching for meaning. I'm not lost. Aren't you? Driving these empty roads night after night, seeing the worst of what people do to each other. Don't you ever wonder if there's something more? I wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in my throat. Because the truth was, I did wonder. Every night, driving through the darkness, dealing with domestic violence, calls and drug busts, and all the casual cruelty that people inflict on each other. Elena, said a woman I didn't recognize. We know about your divorce, about your children who live with their father in Houston, about how you volunteered for the night shift because the days were too empty. How could they know that? How could they know anything about my personal life? We know because we've been watching, learning, caring. Caring about what? About you. About people like you who are ready for something different. And if I'm not interested, then you go back to your patrol, back to your empty apartment, back to your empty life. And if I am interested? Marcus smiled. Then you take a ride with us. See what we've built. See what you could be part of. Elena? Janet said. When was the last time you felt like you belonged somewhere? Really belonged? The honest answer was never. I'd spent my whole life feeling like an outsider. Even in my marriage, even with my children, there was always a part of me that felt disconnected. We can show you what it's like to be truly accepted, Marcus said. Truly valued. Where? Not far. A place where people like us can live without judgment, without pretense. People like us? People who see the world clearly, who understand that most of humanity is sleepwalking through life. I should have called for backup again, should have arrested them all, should have done my job. But instead, I found myself asking, what would I have to give up? Nothing that matters, Janet said. Only the things that have been holding you back. My job. Your job will be taken care of. People will understand that you simply burned out, decided to start fresh somewhere else. My family? Your family has already moved on without you. When was the last time your children called? 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since I'd heard from either of my kids. Elena, Marcus said, you don't have to decide tonight. Just come with us. See what we've built. If you don't like it, we'll bring you back. And if I do like it? Then you become part of something that will give your life meaning. I looked at my patrol car, at the radio that could summon backup, at the job that had become more of a habit than a calling. Then I looked at the people standing before me. They seemed so peaceful, so certain of their place in the world. 1 hour, I said. I'll give you 1 hour. Janet smiled. That's all we need. I followed them off Highway 83 onto a dirt road I'd never noticed before. The road wound through mesquite brush for about 5 miles before opening into a clearing. What I saw there changed everything. It wasn't a campsite or a commune, it was a town. A real town, with houses and streets and people going about their daily lives. How long has this been here? I asked. 15 years, Marcus said. Started with just a few families, grew as more people found us. Or as you found them. Same thing, really. The houses were modest but well-maintained. Gardens flourished despite the arid climate. Children played in yards, while adults sat on porches, talking quietly. It's so normal, I said. That's the point, Janet replied. We're not trying to escape from normalcy. We're trying to create a better version of it. They showed me around the town, the school where children learned not just academic subjects but life skills, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence. The workshop where residents built furniture and artwork and the things they needed for daily life. The gardens where they grew their own food. We're completely self-sufficient, Marcus explained. Everything we need, we make or grow ourselves. What about money, jobs? Some of us still work in the outside world. Others have found ways to contribute from here. But money isn't the priority. Community is. And the recruitment? The abandoned cars? Janet looked uncomfortable for the first time. That's complicated. How complicated? We look for people who are lost, people who are ready for something different. Sometimes they need encouragement to take the first step. What kind of encouragement? We create opportunities for them to question their current life, to see that there are alternatives. By making them think they've been in an accident, by scaring them, by showing them that their old life can disappear in an instant, that they have choices they didn't know they had. And if they choose not to join you, then they don't join us. But their cars are returned to them, usually with a story about temporary amnesia or confusion. Amazing how often people accept explanations that allow them to avoid uncomfortable questions. We walked through the town center where people gathered in small groups, talking and laughing. Everyone seemed genuinely happy, content in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Elena," Janet said, "I want you to meet someone." She led me to a small house at the edge of town. An elderly woman was sitting on the porch reading by lamplight. "This is Sarah Patterson," Janet said. She was the first. Sarah looked up and smiled. She had the kind of face that had seen a lot of life but retained kindness. "You're the sheriff's deputy," she said. "I've heard about you. How long have you been here?" 15 years next month. I was driving home from my husband's funeral when I stopped to help what I thought was a stranded motorist. Instead, I found a family, people who cared about me not because of what I could do for them, but because of who I was. Don't you miss your old life? My old life was an empty house and pension checks. Here, I have purpose. I teach the children, help with the gardens, contribute to something meaningful. But your family, don't they worry? My children live across the country. They called twice a year before I came here. The difference is, now I don't spend the other 363 days waiting for those calls." We talked for an hour. Sarah told me about the early days of the community, how they'd built something from nothing through cooperation and shared vision. "The hardest part," she said, "was letting go of the idea that I had to be unhappy. That struggle and loneliness were just natural parts of life. And now? Now I wake up every morning with something to do, people who need me, a place where I belong." As we walked back through the town, I found myself evaluating my own life. The empty apartment, the job that had become routine, the children who rarely called, the ex-husband who'd moved on to a new family. "Elena," Marcus said, "what do you think?" "It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something more sinister." "Because we recruit people? Because you make people disappear?" "We make people disappear from lives that weren't working, and we give them new lives that do work. But the deception is temporary and necessary. Most people are so trapped in their routines that they can't imagine alternatives. Sometimes you have to show them that their current life isn't as solid as they think." We'd reached the edge of town. My patrol car was parked where I'd left it, and beyond that was the dirt road leading back to Highway 83. "Decision time," Janet said. "What exactly are you asking me to decide?" "Whether you want to go back to your old life or start a new one." "And if I choose the new life?" "Then you become part of this community. Your disappearance will be handled discreetly. Car found abandoned, Evidence of possible foul play, but no body recovered. Eventually, the case will go cold. And if I choose the old life, then you drive back to Highway 83, continue your patrol, pretend this never happened. But I know about this place now. Yes, and that knowledge will eat at you every night as you drive those empty roads. She was right, and I knew it. I'd seen something here that I'd been looking for my whole life without realizing it. Community, purpose, belonging. What about my investigation, the task force? We'll find some evidence of criminal activity, maybe a drug operation or human trafficking ring, something to explain the disappearances without leading back here. You've thought of everything. We've had practice. I looked back at the town. Lights in windows. People living quiet, meaningful lives. Then I looked at my patrol car and thought about the drive back to an empty apartment. Elena, Marcus said, you don't have to decide tonight. Take some time. Think about it. How much time? As much as you need. But remember, every night you spend patrolling Highway 83 is a night you could be spending here. I drove back to the highway in silence. The return to my regular patrol felt surreal, like stepping back into a dream I'd been having for years. The rest of my shift passed without incident. Just the long, dark road and the occasional set of headlights in the distance. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. The community, the sense of purpose, the feeling that everyone belonged. Dawn was breaking as I headed back to the station. Ray was already there, coffee in hand, looking over reports. How was your night? He asked. Quiet. Anything on your end? Nothing. It's like they just vanished. Maybe they did. Elena, are you okay? You seem different. Just tired. Long shift. But I wasn't tired. I was thinking. That evening, I drove to my apartment, looked around at the second-hand furniture, the bare walls, the silence that had become so familiar I barely noticed it anymore. I called my children, got voicemail, left messages that wouldn't be returned for days, if at all. I called my ex-husband. We talked for 5 minutes about logistics, school events, child support, the routine business of being divorced parents. Then I sat in my living room and tried to remember the last time I'd felt truly happy, truly connected to something larger than myself. I couldn't. The next night I was back on Highway 83. The road seemed different now. Not just empty, but hollow. A place where people disappeared not because they were taken, but because they were looking for something better. Around 2 a.m., I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. A car following at a distance, just like before. I pulled over. The car pulled over behind me. Janet Rodriguez got out and walked to my patrol car. Have you thought about it? She asked. I've thought about little else. And? I looked down the highway, miles of empty road stretching into darkness. Then I looked at Janet, who seemed so certain of her place in the world. What happens to my investigation? We'll provide enough evidence to close the case. Some kind of organized crime connection, interstate trafficking, something that explains the disappearances without implicating anyone still alive. And my colleagues will understand that you burned out, that the stress of the investigation pushed you over the edge. It happens to cops all the time. And me? You become Elena Vasquez, resident of a community where people care about each other, where your skills and experience are valued, where you have a purpose beyond filling out reports and arresting drunk drivers. I thought about Sarah Patterson, about the contentment in her face, about waking up every morning with something meaningful to do. Elena, Janet said, when was the last time you felt like you mattered? The honest answer was never. In my marriage, I'd been an afterthought. As a mother, I'd been replaced by my ex-husband's new wife. As a cop, I was just another uniform filling a shift. What would I do there, in your community? Whatever you're good at. We always need people with leadership skills, with experience in crisis management. And we have children who could benefit from learning about justice, about protecting others. You want me to be a teacher? I want you to be yourself. The person you were meant to be before life convinced you to settle for less. I sat in my patrol car for a long time, engine running, radio crackling with the routine communications of night shift officers across the county. Finally, I turned off the radio, turned off the engine, got out of the car. "I'll need to make some arrangements," I said. Janet smiled. "Of course. Take whatever time you need." "How will I find you again?" "We'll find you. When you're ready." She got back in her car and drove away, leaving me standing beside my patrol car on the empty highway. 3 days later, I submitted my resignation to the department, cited stress, burnout, the need for a fresh start. Everyone understood. Cop burnout is common, especially in isolated areas like this. I put my apartment up for rent, forwarded my mail to a post office box, and made arrangements for my final paychecks to be direct deposited. Then I drove to mile marker 84 on Highway 83 and waited. They came for me at 2 a.m. Janet was driving with Marcus in the passenger seat. They led me off the highway onto that dirt road I'd traveled once before. But this time, I wasn't just visiting. This time, I was coming home. The community welcomed me like I'd always been part of it. They gave me a house, introduced me to my neighbors, showed me how things worked. I started teaching the children about conflict resolution, about protecting the community, about the skills they'd need to navigate the outside world if they chose to leave. Most of them wouldn't leave. Why would they? They had everything they needed here. Purpose, community, belonging. The things I'd been searching for my entire life without realizing it. 6 months later, I was standing at the edge of town when I saw headlights on the dirt road. A new arrival. Someone else who'd been offered a choice between their old life and something better. I walked out to meet them, just as Janet had met me. "Welcome," I said to the frightened-looking woman behind the wheel. "We've been waiting for you." Because that's what we do here. We wait. We watch. We offer alternatives to people who are ready for something different. And sometimes, if they're lucky, they're brave enough to take the offer. What would you do if someone offered you a community where you truly belonged? Where your life had meaning beyond the daily grind of survival? How do you know the life you're living is the life you're meant to live? Because I can tell you from experience, so sometimes the scariest thing isn't disappearing. Sometimes the scariest thing is realizing you were never really there to begin with. I've been sheriff of Bledsoe County, Texas for 12 years now. Population 4,847 on a good day, spread across 1,200 square miles of scrubland, oil derricks, and forgotten dreams. Most nights, the biggest emergency I face is old Pete getting drunk and trying to ride his neighbor's bull again. But some nights remind you why the darkness between those scattered porch lights feels so goddamn heavy. It started 3 weeks ago. Tuesday night, 11:47 p.m. According to my log, I was finishing up paperwork at the station when the phone rang. Not the emergency line, the regular station number that only locals really know. "Sheriff's Department, this is Sheriff Martinez." Nothing, just breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing that made my skin crawl for reasons I couldn't name. "Hello? Anyone there?" Click. I stared at the receiver for a moment, then shrugged it off. Probably some kid playing pranks. Lord knows we've had our share of those over the years. But then it happened again the next night. Same time. 11:47 p.m. Exactly. This time, I was ready. Sheriff's Department. The breathing again. But this time, there was something else. Background noise. A television, maybe? No. Too rhythmic. Too mechanical. Listen, if this is some kind of joke... She's so beautiful when she sleeps." The voice was barely a whisper, gravelly like someone who'd been smoking unfiltered cigarettes for decades. Male, I thought, though it was hard to tell. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there for a full minute, staring at the phone. In 12 years of law enforcement, you develop instincts, and every instinct I had was screaming that this wasn't a prank. I pulled out my incident log and started writing. Time, date, nature of call, the details that might matter later. Because in a county where everyone knows everyone, a voice I didn't recognize talking about someone sleeping, that wasn't good. Wednesday night, 11:47 p.m. I had Deputy Collins with me this time. Sarah's good people, former military, steady hands, doesn't spook easily. I'd briefed her on the previous calls, and she'd agreed to stay late. The phone rang exactly on time. I nodded to Sarah, who had her finger hovering over the record button on our ancient tape system. We'd tested it 3 times to make sure it was working. "Sheriff's Department, Sheriff Martinez speaking." She moved in her sleep tonight, turned toward the window. The same voice, same gravelly whisper, but now there was something else in it. Excitement? Anticipation? "Who is this? Who are you talking about?" Her hair catches the moonlight, like spun silver. "Sir, I need you to identify yourself. Are you saying you're watching someone without their consent?" A sound that might have been laughter, dry, humorless. "Consent?" The word was drawn out, savored. Such a pretty word. "I'm going to trace this call. If you're on someone's property..." "You can't trace landlines to cell towers, Sheriff, and you can't trace what doesn't exist." The line went dead. Sarah and I looked at each other. She stopped the recorder and played it back. Clear as day, every word. "Jesus, Sheriff, that's..." "I know." I was already reaching for my contact list. "I'm calling the phone company in the morning, see if they can trace it." But deep down, I knew what they'd tell me. In rural Texas, with our patchwork of ancient landline systems and spotty cell coverage, tracing calls isn't like it is in the movies, especially not from someone who clearly knew what they were doing. Thursday morning, I drove the county roads, all 247 miles of them. Looking for what? I wasn't sure. A house with a clear view of a bedroom window? A woman living alone? Someone who might be in danger? Bledsoe County is bigger than some eastern states, but it's not exactly densely populated. Most folks live in clusters around the 3 small towns, Bledsoe itself, Millerville, and Copper Creek. Between them, it's mostly ranches, farmland, and the occasional homestead. I stopped at every isolated house I could find, made up stories about checking on folks, asking about suspicious activity. Most people were happy to chat. It gets lonely out here, and a visit from the sheriff is often the most excitement they'll see all week. But I didn't find anything. Or rather, I found too much. 7 houses with single women living alone, 3 with bedrooms facing accessible windows, dozens of places where someone could hide and watch. That evening, I stationed myself in the parking lot of Miller's Gas and Go, right in the center of town. From there, I could see the station and respond to any emergency calls while staying mobile. Sarah was at the station, ready to record. 11:47 p.m. The call came through on the radio. Sarah's voice, tight with tension. "Sheriff, he's on the line. Same voice." "Put him through." A click, then that familiar gravelly whisper. "Good evening, Sheriff Martinez. Out for a drive tonight?" My blood turned to ice. He could see me. Wherever he was, he could see me. I scanned the area around the gas station. Empty road in both directions. The only light came from the station itself and the flickering neon sign that read, "Miller's Gas and Go, open 24 hours. "Where are you?" "Close enough to matter. Far enough to be safe." "What do you want?" "To share. To show you what I see." "I'm listening." Tonight, she left her window open. Just a crack. For the breeze, I think. It's been so hot lately. I was already moving, heading for my patrol car. But which direction? The county was spread out in all directions, and I had no idea where he might be. Keep talking. She has a cat, orange tabby. It sits in the window sometimes, watching me watch her. A cat. That was something. Not much, but something. What else? She reads before bed. Romance novels mostly. The kind with the half-naked men on the covers. Despite everything, I found myself cataloging details. Someone who could see well enough to make out book covers. Someone close enough to observe habits. Sheriff? Sarah's voice cut through the radio static. I've got the phone company on the other line. They're trying to trace it, but it's not working, the voice said, clearly having heard Sarah's transmission. Technology, Sheriff. It's wonderful when it works. Listen, I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not a game. The voice was suddenly sharp, angry. Games have rules. Games are fair. Then what is it? Preparation. The line went dead. I sat in my patrol car, engine running, but with nowhere to go. Every house in the county suddenly felt vulnerable. Every woman living alone was a potential target, and I had no idea how to protect them all. Friday morning, I called in the Texas Rangers, explained the situation to Sergeant Williams, who I'd worked with on a few cases over the years. He listened without interrupting, then asked the obvious question. Any actual crimes committed, Sheriff? Not yet, but you've got a feeling. I get it, and your feelings are usually right. What do you need? Help. Someone who knows about this kind of thing. Profiling, maybe? I'll make some calls. Meanwhile, you might want to think about increasing patrols, and maybe having a chat with the local women about security. That afternoon, I held an impromptu town meeting at the community center. Told folks about the calls without going into too much detail. Recommended they check their locks, maybe invest in some motion sensor lights. Most people took it seriously. This is Texas, after all. Folks here know how to take care of themselves, but I could see the questions in their eyes. The same questions I was asking myself. Who was this person? What did they really want? And why was I so sure that the calls were just the beginning? Saturday night, I was ready. I'd positioned Deputy Collins at the north end of town, Deputy Hanson at the south end, and myself in the center. We had radios, cell phones, and a direct line to the Texas Rangers if things went south. 11:47 p.m. The call came right on schedule. Sheriff Martinez. Good evening, Sheriff. I see you've brought friends. Again, he could see us. But where was he? I've got officers positioned throughout the county. If you're planning anything... Planning? That dry laugh again. Sheriff, I've been planning for years. Years? Did you think this was spontaneous? Random? I've been watching your county for a very long time, learning, waiting. Waiting for what? For the right moment. For the right person. What person? You'll know when you see her. The line went dead. I keyed my radio. All units, report. North end clear, Collins reported. South end clear, Hanson confirmed. But clear of what? I was starting to think we were chasing shadows. Sunday morning brought our first real lead. Mrs. Henderson, who lived about 5 miles east of town, called to report someone had been on her property. Footprints in the mud around her house, trash scattered around her garbage cans. I drove out there with Collins. Mrs. Henderson was in her 70s, lived alone since her husband died 3 years ago. Sweet lady, but sharp as a tack. Started about a week ago, she said, leading us around to the back of her house. Thought it might be raccoons at first, but then I saw the footprints. The prints were clear in the dried mud. Work boots, size 11 or 12. Leading from the tree line to the back of the house, then around to the side where Mrs. Henderson's bedroom window was located. Ma'am, have you noticed anything else? Any phone calls, maybe? She shook her head. Phone's been working fine. Though, she paused, thinking. There was one thing. Night before last, I could have sworn I heard my cat crying, but when I looked, she was right there in the bedroom with me. What kind of cat? Orange tabby. Sweetest thing you ever saw. My blood ran cold. Collins saw my expression and stepped closer. Mrs. Henderson, I need you to pack a bag. Stay with family in town for a few days. Sheriff, I've lived in this house for 43 years. I'm not about to... Ma'am, please. Just for a few days, until we can figure out what's going on. She must have seen something in my face, because she nodded and went inside to pack. That evening, I sat in my patrol car in Mrs. Henderson's driveway. Collins was hidden in the tree line with a clear view of the house. Hanson was on standby back in town. I'd turned my radio down low and was trying to think like a predator. If I were planning something, what would I do? How would I approach? The house was dark except for a single light I'd left on in the living room. From the outside, it would look like Mrs. Henderson was home, maybe watching television or reading. 10:30 p.m. Nothing. 11 o'clock p.m. A slight breeze rustled the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. 11:30 p.m. Still nothing. 11:47 p.m. My radio crackled to life. Sheriff, this is Collins. I've got movement. Someone's approaching from the south. Description? Can't tell. Moving too carefully, staying in the shadows. I'm moving to intercept. I eased out of the patrol car, leaving the door open to avoid the sound of it slamming. Drew my weapon and moved toward the south side of the house. The motion sensor lights I'd installed that afternoon blazed to life. Nothing. No one there. Collins, talk to me. He's gone. Disappeared into the trees. Which direction? I don't know. 1 second he was there, the next. I spent the next hour searching the property with a flashlight. Found more footprints, but they led to the gravel road and disappeared. Whoever this was, he was good at not being found. But he'd made a mistake. He'd shown himself. And now I knew he was real. Monday morning, I called Sergeant Williams again. We've got escalation, I told him. He's moved from calls to physical surveillance. Any evidence? Footprints, disturbed property, and he's watching my officers. How do you know? Because he can see us when we can't see him. Williams was quiet for a moment. Sheriff, I'm sending someone down. Agent Carter, she specializes in this kind of thing. Should be there by evening. Agent Carter arrived at 6 p.m. sharp. Tall, blonde, looked like she could handle herself. She listened to my report without interrupting, then asked to hear the recordings. Classic escalation pattern, she said after listening to all the tapes. He's building up to something. The question is what? Any idea about the timeline? Could be days, could be weeks, but based on the pattern, I'd say soon. What do you recommend? We set a trap, give him what he wants. Which is? A target. I didn't like where this was heading. Agent Carter, I'm not going to put some innocent woman at risk. Not innocent. Me. She explained her plan. She'd pose as a new resident, rent a house on the outskirts of town, make herself visible, establish a routine, draw him out. It's dangerous, I said. It's my job. Tuesday evening, Agent Carter moved into the old Kowalski place, about 3 miles west of town. 1-story ranch house, bedroom window facing the woods. Perfect for someone who liked to watch. She'd spent the day in town, making herself known, bought groceries, introduced herself to neighbors, made sure everyone knew she was living alone. That night, I positioned myself about a quarter-mile away, hidden in an abandoned barn with a clear view of the house. Collins was stationed on the north side, Hanson on the south. 11:47 p.m. The call came through to my cell phone. Agent Carter had given the number to several people in town, claiming it was her new home number. Sheriff Martinez, She's new. The voice was excited, almost breathless. Fresh, I like that. Who is this? You know who this is? The question is, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to catch you. Are you? Because I'm watching her right now. She's brushing her teeth. Pink toothbrush. Such attention to detail. I keyed my radio. All units. He's got eyes on the house. She's moving to the bedroom now, turning on the lamp beside her bed. Through my binoculars, I could see Agent Carter's silhouette in the bedroom window. She was following the plan perfectly. What do you want from her? Want? The voice was thoughtful. I want to know what she tastes like when she's afraid. You sick bastard. Language, Sheriff. There might be children listening. Where are you? Closer than you think, farther than you can reach. The line went dead. I waited, watched. Nothing moved in the darkness around the house. Then, Agent Carter's voice crackled through the radio. I've got someone at the back door, trying the handle. All units, move in. I ran from the barn, flashlight in one hand, weapon in the other. Collins and Hansen converged from their positions. The motion sensor lights blazed to life as we approached the house. Agent Carter was on the back door, looking out through the glass. He's gone, she said, but he left something. Taped to the outside of the door was a photograph, a Polaroid taken from the tree line. It showed Agent Carter in the bedroom window, brushing her teeth. On the back, in neat handwriting, soon. Wednesday morning, I called in every favor I had, got the Texas Rangers to expand their search grid, contacted the FBI about bringing in more resources. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. This guy was too smart, too careful. He'd been planning this for years, and we were trying to catch up in days. That afternoon, Agent Carter suggested we try a different approach. He's been calling every night at exactly 11:47, she said. What if we don't answer? You think he'll do something rash? I think he'll get frustrated, and frustrated people make mistakes. That evening, we maintained our positions around the house. But when 11:47 came and went, we let the phone ring. 23 rings. Then silence. 11:50 p.m. The phone rang again. We let it ring. 11:53 p.m. Again. 11:56 p.m. The phone rang, and this time it didn't stop. It just kept ringing and ringing. Then Agent Carter's voice cut through the radio. He's here. Back door. I could see him through my binoculars. A figure in dark clothing, moving with purpose. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. All units, move in. This time we were ready. Collins came from the north, Hansen from the south, and I approached from the west. Perfect triangulation. The figure saw us coming. For a moment, he just stood there in the glare of the motion sensor lights. Then he turned and ran. He was fast. Faster than someone his size should have been. But we were prepared for that too. Collins cut him off at the fence line. Hansen blocked his path to the road. I came up behind him, weapon drawn. Stop right there. Hands where I can see them. He stopped, turned around slowly. The face that looked back at me was ordinary, mid-40s maybe. Thinning hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting. Hello, Sheriff Martinez, he said calmly. I've been looking forward to meeting you. You're under arrest for stalking, harassment, and trespassing. Am I? He smiled. And what exactly are you going to charge me with? Making phone calls? Walking on public property? We've got you on surveillance, photographs. Taken from a public road. No law against photography. He was right, and he knew it. Smart. Too smart. The phone calls. I never threatened anyone. Never used obscene language. Check your recordings. I wanted to hit him, wanted to wipe that smug expression off his face. But I'm a professional. Harold Finch, he said, extending his hand as if we were meeting at a church social. "I'm a traveling salesman. Agricultural equipment. I have business cards." Agent Carter approached cautiously. "Mr. Finch, we need to ask you some questions." "Of course. I'm happy to cooperate with law enforcement." We brought him to the station. Miranda rights, the whole process. He waived his right to an attorney, said he was happy to answer questions. For 3 hours, Agent Carter questioned him. He answered every question politely, completely, and in a way that told us absolutely nothing useful. Yes, he'd been in the area for several weeks. Business was slow, so he'd been taking his time. Yes, he'd made some phone calls. He was lonely, and talking to the sheriff made him feel safer. Yes, he'd been walking around at night. He suffered from insomnia, and fresh air helped. The photographs? He was interested in rural architecture. Was that a crime? Every answer was reasonable. Every explanation was plausible. And every word made my skin crawl. "Mr. Finch," Agent Carter said finally, "can you tell us where you were planning to go next?" "Oh, I think I'll stay in the area a while longer. Such a lovely community. So peaceful." "We can't hold him," Agent Carter said after we'd released him. "He's right. Technically, he hasn't committed any prosecutable crimes. Yet. But I knew it was just a matter of time. Men like Harold Finch don't just stop. They escalate." Thursday morning, I called Sheriff Davis in the next county over. "Jim, I'm sending you a file on someone, Harold Finch. Keep an eye out for him." "What's he done?" "Nothing I can prove. Everything I can feel." "That bad?" "That bad." That evening, I drove past the Kowalski place. Agent Carter was packing her things, preparing to leave. The operation was officially over. But I knew Harold Finch was still out there, watching, waiting. Friday morning, I got a call from Sheriff Davis. "Ray, about that Harold Finch character. We found his car abandoned on County Road 47. No sign of him." "Any idea where he went?" "Could be anywhere. But Ray, we found something in the car. A notebook, full of names, addresses, descriptions, women mostly, all over Texas." "How many names?" 43. I felt sick. "Jim, I need you to fax me that list." "Already on its way." The list arrived 20 minutes later. 43 names, spread across 22 counties, all women living alone, all with detailed descriptions of their homes, their routines, their vulnerabilities. And at the bottom of the list, in Harold Finch's neat handwriting, "The next phase begins now." I called every sheriff on the list, warned them about Finch, described his methods, his patterns. Most of them took it seriously. A few said they'd keep an eye out. 1 or 2 brushed me off, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Harold Finch was gone, disappeared into the vastness of Texas. And somewhere out there, he was choosing his next target. Saturday morning, I got a call from Agent Carter. "Sheriff, I wanted to thank you for your cooperation, and to let you know we're putting together a task force. Multi-county, multi-agency. We're going to find him. Any leads? We're working on it. But Ray, be careful. Men like Finch don't forget, and they don't forgive." That evening, I was at home for the first time in weeks. My wife, Maria, had cooked my favorite meal, chicken enchiladas and Spanish rice. We sat on the porch afterward, watching the sunset. "You've been different lately," she said. "More cautious. Just work stuff. Is it over, whatever it was?" I looked out at the darkening sky, at the shadows gathering between the trees. "I hope so." But as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Men like Harold Finch don't just disappear. They adapt, they evolve. They find new hunting grounds. And somewhere out there, in some other county, some other woman was about to become the focus of his attention. The phone rang inside the house. Maria got up to answer it. "Ray," she called. "It's for you. Says it's important." I walked inside and picked up the phone. "Sheriff Martinez." "Good evening, Sheriff." The voice was familiar, gravelly, amused. "Finch, I wanted to thank you for the introduction to Agent Carter. She's quite lovely, isn't she? Where are you?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere I can watch and wait." "We'll find you." "Perhaps. But in the meantime, Sheriff, I have a question for you." "What?" "Your wife, Maria. She's very beautiful. Does she always leave the kitchen window open when she cooks?" The line went dead. I dropped the phone and ran to the kitchen. The window was open, just a crack, for the breeze. Outside, the darkness was complete. And somewhere in that darkness, Harold Finch was watching, waiting, planning his next move. What would you do if you knew someone was watching your family and you couldn't prove it? How do you fight an enemy who's always one step ahead, always just beyond reach? Because I'll tell you something, this is just the beginning. My name is Sheriff Bobby Caldwell, and I've been the law in Esperanza County, Texas for going on 18 years. Population 3,200, spread across 800 square miles of cotton fields, oil wells, and stubborn pride. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where secrets are hard to keep, and where the past has long roots that run deep into the hardpan soil. But some secrets are worth keeping, and some evidence is better left locked away. I learned that lesson the hard way when I inherited more than just a badge and a responsibility to protect and serve. I inherited room 12 in the basement of the courthouse, the evidence locker that my predecessor, Sheriff Tom Brennan, had managed for 37 years before his heart gave out on a hot Tuesday in July. "Keys in the top drawer," Deputy Marshal Frank Espinoza told me as he handed over the transition paperwork. Frank had been Tom's right hand for 15 years, and he looked like he'd aged a decade in the 3 weeks since the funeral. Tom was real particular about that room, said it contained the history of the county. Evidence from old cases? Some of it. But Tom had his own system. Said some things were too dangerous to process through normal channels. That should have been my first warning. But in those early days, I was more concerned with learning the job than questioning the methods of a man who'd kept the peace for nearly 4 decades. The evidence locker was in the courthouse basement, behind 2 locked doors, and down a hallway that smelled of dust and old paper. Room 12 was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, lined with metal shelving units loaded with boxes, bags, and filing cabinets. Most of it was standard stuff. Drug seizures, weapons from domestic disputes, personal effects from suicides and accidents. Each item tagged and cataloged according to department policy. But in the back corner, there was a set of shelves that didn't follow the standard system. No case numbers, no dates, no chain of custody forms. Just boxes labeled with years and letters. 1987A, 1993B, 2001C. 18 boxes in total, spanning Tom Brennan's entire career. I should have left them alone. Should have trusted that a man with 37 years of experience knew what he was doing. But curiosity is a dangerous thing in a lawman, and I was still young enough to think I could handle whatever I might find. The first box I opened was labeled 1994D. Inside was a manila folder containing photographs, witness statements, and medical records. The photos showed a young woman, maybe early 20s, with severe bruising around her neck and defensive wounds on her hands and arms. The victim was Sarah Chen, a school teacher who'd moved to Esperanza County from Dallas 6 months earlier. Found dead in her apartment on November 15, 1994. Official cause of death, suicide by hanging. But the photos told a different story. The bruising was wrong for a hanging. The defensive wounds suggested a struggle. And the witness statements. Mrs. Dorothy Martinez, the victim's neighbor. I heard arguing that night, a man's voice, very angry. But when I asked Miss Chen about it the next day, she said she'd been watching television. James Morrison, landlord. Miss Chen had been receiving threatening phone calls. She asked me about changing her locks twice in the past month. Dr. Patricia Vance, county medical examiner. Injuries are consistent with manual strangulation followed by post-mortem hanging. Recommend investigation into potential homicide. But there was no investigation. According to the final report, Miss Chen's death was ruled a suicide and the case was closed. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note in Tom Brennan's distinctive scrawl. Evidence insufficient for prosecution. Family has been notified and compensated. Matter closed. Compensated? What did that mean? I pulled the next box. 1989B. This time, the victim was a 15-year-old girl named Maria Santos, found in Willow Creek on August 23, 1989. Official cause of death: accidental drowning. But again, the evidence told a different story. The girl had been sexually assaulted. There were signs of a struggle. Witnesses reported seeing her with an older man at the county fair the night before her body was discovered. Tom's note: perpetrator identified but untouchable. Family relocated with assistance. Matter closed. I sat back in my chair, staring at the boxes. 18 of them. 18 cases that had been closed without justice. 18 victims whose families had been given money instead of answers. But why? What made these cases different from the hundreds of others that Tom had investigated over the years? I opened 1987A. The victim was a migrant worker named Carlos Ruiz, found dead in a cotton field on September 12, 1987. Official cause of death: heat stroke. But Carlos had been beaten, severely. The photos showed multiple fractures, internal bleeding, injuries that were clearly the result of assault. Witnesses reported seeing Carlos in an argument with the field supervisor the day before his death. The supervisor had accused him of stealing equipment. Tom's note: perpetrator protected by family connections. Worker family threatened with deportation. Compensation provided. Matter closed. I was starting to understand. These weren't just unsolved cases. These were cases that had been deliberately buried because the perpetrators were untouchable. But untouchable by whom? The answer was in the final folder of each box. A list of names and phone numbers. No titles, no official designations. Just names and numbers. I recognized some of them. Prominent families in the county. Business owners, politicians. People with money and influence. People who could make problems disappear. I spent the next week going through all 18 boxes. The pattern was always the same: a crime committed by someone with connections. Evidence gathered but never processed. Families silenced with money or threats. Cases closed without justice. Tom Brennan hadn't been lazy or corrupt. He'd been practical. In a county where the same families had held power for generations, some battles couldn't be won. Better to get the families some compensation and keep the peace than to fight a war that would destroy everyone involved. But understanding the logic didn't make it easier to accept. On Friday afternoon, Frank Espinoza knocked on my office door. "Sheriff, you've been spending a lot of time in the basement lately." "Just getting familiar with our case files." "Find anything interesting?" There was something in his tone that made me look up from my paperwork. Frank was watching me carefully, like he was waiting for something. "Frank, did you know about room 12? I knew Tom kept some files separate. Never asked why. "And you never looked?" "Tom said some doors were better left closed. I trusted his judgment." "Even when innocent people died without justice?" Frank was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled a chair up to my desk and sat down. "Bobby, let me tell you something about this county, about the way things work here." "I'm listening." Esperanza County has 3 major employers: the cotton gin, the oil refinery, and the cattle processing plant. Between them, they employ about 60% of the people who live here. So all three are owned by families that have been here for 4 generations. The Donaldsons own the gin, the Washingtons own the refinery, the Morettis own the processing plant. What does that have to do with the evidence locker? Everything. Because when someone from one of those families commits a crime, prosecuting them means destroying the economic foundation of the county. That's not how justice works. That's how survival works. You think the families of those victims would be better off if the perpetrators went to prison and 1,000 people lost their jobs? I think they'd be better off if the people who killed their loved ones faced consequences. Would they? Or would they just be trading one kind of suffering for another? Frank leaned back in his chair. Tom understood that sometimes the best you can do is harm reduction. Make sure the families are taken care of. Make sure the perpetrators know they're being watched. Try to prevent it from happening again. Did it work? Did it prevent anything? Look through those boxes again, Bobby. Look at the dates. I had looked at the dates. The cases spanned 37 years, but they weren't evenly distributed. Most of them were from the first 15 years of Tom's career. The last 5 years showed only 2 cases. The frequency decreased because Tom's system worked. Word got around that certain kinds of behavior would have consequences, even if those consequences weren't traditional prosecution. What kinds of consequences? Economic pressure, social isolation. Sometimes people would suddenly find their business loans called in, or their social standing in the community would take a hit. And sometimes they'd just move away, I said, remembering some of the notes I'd seen. Sometimes they'd move away. Frank stood up. Bobby, I'm not saying Tom's system was perfect. I'm saying it was the best solution he could find for an impossible situation. So, what am I supposed to do? Just continue his tradition of selective justice? I'm saying you should think carefully before you decide to change things. Because once you open that door, you can't close it again. That weekend, I drove out to visit Mrs. Santos, the mother of the 15-year-old girl who'd been killed in 1989. She lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a garden that showed more care than most people lavish on their children. "Sheriff Caldwell," she said when I knocked on her door. "What brings you by?" "I wanted to ask you about your daughter, Maria." Her face changed, became guarded, careful. "Maria's been dead for 32 years, Sheriff. Why are you asking about her now?" "I've been reviewing some old cases. I found some inconsistencies in the investigation." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "The kind that suggest her death wasn't accidental." Mrs. Santos stepped onto her porch and closed the door behind her. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Sheriff Brennan told us that Maria's case was complicated, that the person responsible was protected." "Protected by whom?" "By people with more power than we had. Sheriff Brennan said we could fight it and lose everything, or we could accept help and try to rebuild our lives." "What kind of help?" "Money for a new house. Help getting my other children into better schools. A promise that the man who killed Maria would be watched, that he wouldn't hurt anyone else." "Did you believe him?" "I believed that Sheriff Brennan was a good man trying to do right in a world that doesn't always allow for right to win." "Mrs. Santos, do you know who killed your daughter?" She looked at me for a long time. Then she shook her head. "Sheriff, some knowledge is too dangerous to carry, too dangerous to share, even if it means justice. Especially if it means justice, because justice for Maria might mean injustice for a lot of other people. Such as? Such as the families who depend on certain businesses for their livelihoods, such as the community that has found a way to function despite its imperfections." She turned to go back inside, then paused. "Sheriff Caldwell, I visit Maria's grave every week. I talk to her, tell her about my life, about her brothers and sisters and their children. You know what I don't tell her? What? I don't tell her that I wish things had been different, because wishing for different means wishing for a world where good people like Sheriff Brennan don't have to make impossible choices. That evening, I sat in my office and tried to understand what I'd inherited. Not just a badge and a responsibility, but a system of compromises that had kept a fragile community intact for nearly 4 decades. The phone rang. "Sheriff Caldwell? This is Margaret Donaldson." I knew the name. The Donaldson family owned the cotton gin and about half the farmland in the county. "Mrs. Donaldson, what can I do for you?" "I understand you've been asking questions about some old cases." "Part of my job, ma'am." "Of course. I was wondering if you might have time to meet tomorrow. For lunch, perhaps. I'd like to discuss some community matters with you." "What kind of community matters?" "The kind that require discretion. Shall we say noon at the Cattle Baron?" The Cattle Baron was the nicest restaurant in town. The kind of place where business was conducted over handshake deals and unspoken understandings. "I'll be there." "Excellent. Oh, and Sheriff, please bring your appetite. I have a feeling we'll be discussing quite a feast of information." She hung up before I could respond. The next day, I arrived at the Cattle Baron to find Margaret Donaldson waiting in a corner booth. She was a woman in her 70s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of presence that comes from decades of wielding quiet power. "Sheriff Caldwell, thank you for coming." "Mrs. Donaldson, please call me Margaret. We're going to be working together for a long time." "Are we?" "That depends on how well you understand the nature of your position." The waitress brought us menus, but Margaret waved hers away. "I'll have the usual, dear, and bring the sheriff whatever he'd like." After I'd ordered, Margaret leaned forward. "Sheriff, I'm going to tell you something that Tom Brennan learned in his first year on the job. Esperanza County exists in a delicate balance. That balance has been maintained for 4 generations through careful management and mutual understanding. Mutual understanding of what? Of the fact that perfect justice is the enemy of imperfect peace. I'm not sure I follow. You've been looking through Tom's special files. You've seen what happens when members of certain families overstep boundaries. I've seen what happens when they commit crimes and face no consequences. No legal consequences," Margaret corrected, "but consequences nonetheless. Such as? Richard Moretti, the case from 1994 involving the school teacher. Do you know what happened to Richard after that incident?" I shook my head. "He was sent away to a facility that specializes in helping people with impulse control issues. He spent 3 years there, then returned to manage the processing plant under very strict supervision." "Supervision by whom?" "By his family, by the community, by people who understood that some problems require ongoing management rather than simple punishment." "And if he hadn't cooperated with this management, then the processing plant would have found new management, and Richard would have found himself facing legal consequences after all." The food arrived, but I'd lost my appetite. "Mrs. Donaldson, are you telling me that Tom Brennan was running some kind of shadow justice system?" "I'm telling you that Tom Brennan understood the difference between justice and vengeance, and he understood that sometimes the health of a community requires solutions that don't fit neatly into legal frameworks." "What about the victims' families?" "We're taken care of, are still being taken care of. Maria Santos's mother lives in a house that's paid for. Her surviving children all went to college on scholarships provided by community benefactors. They have good jobs, stable lives, blood money, practical compassion. The difference is in how you choose to see it." Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. "Sheriff, I'm going to show you something that Tom never had to deal with, because in his time, our little system worked well enough that serious problems were rare." She opened the folder. Inside were photographs of a young woman, maybe mid-20s with dark hair and a bright smile. Jennifer Walsh. She moved here 3 months ago to teach at the elementary school. Sweet girl. Dedicated teacher. The children love her. What about her? She's been receiving attention from someone she doesn't want attention from. What kind of attention? Phone calls, gifts left on her doorstep, someone watching her house at night. Have you reported this to my department? Not yet, because the person giving her this attention is David Washington, the youngest son of the family that owns the oil refinery. I felt my stomach drop. How serious is it? Serious enough that Jennifer has started sleeping with a baseball bat beside her bed. Serious enough that she's considering breaking her teaching contract and leaving town. What do you want me to do about it? What Tom would have done. Have a conversation with the Washington family. Make them understand that David's behavior needs to stop before it escalates. And if they don't listen, then you'll have to decide whether you want to handle this through traditional channels or through the system that Tom built. Traditional channels meaning arrest and prosecution, which would destroy the Washington family business and put 800 people out of work. Yes. And Tom's system meaning? David gets help. Jennifer gets protection. The community stays intact. I stared at the photographs of Jennifer Walsh, a young woman trying to build a life in a small town, not knowing that her safety depended on the discretion of powerful families and the compromises of local law enforcement. Margaret, what happens if I refuse to participate in this system? Then you'll find yourself fighting battles you can't win against people who have resources you can't match. And in the end, the victims won't be any safer, but the community will be destroyed. And if I do participate, then you become part of something that has kept this county stable and mostly peaceful for nearly 40 years. She closed the folder. Sheriff, I'm not asking you to decide today. I'm asking you to think about what Tom Brennan learned over the course of his career. That sometimes the best you can do is minimize harm and protect the innocent as best you can. What about justice? Justice is a luxury that small communities can't always afford. That evening, I drove past Jennifer Walsh's house. It was a small rental on Maple Street, the kind of place a young teacher could afford on a starting salary. The lights were on, and I could see her moving around inside, grading papers, probably, or preparing lessons for the next day. What I couldn't see was whether someone was watching her from the shadows, whether David Washington was out there somewhere, planning his next move. I thought about the 18 boxes in room 12, 18 cases where justice had been sacrificed for stability, 18 families who'd accepted compensation instead of prosecution. And I thought about Margaret Donaldson's offer. Join the system or fight it alone. The next morning, I called the Washington house. This is Sheriff Caldwell. I need to speak with Mr. Harold Washington. May I ask what this is regarding? Police business. Harold Washington was a man in his 60s who'd inherited the oil refinery from his father and expanded it into the largest employer in the county. He had the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money or consequences. Sheriff Caldwell, he said when he arrived at my office. I hear you wanted to see me. I wanted to discuss your son, David. What about him? He's been bothering Jennifer Walsh, the new school teacher. Harold's expression didn't change. Bothering her how? Phone calls, unwanted gifts, surveillance? Those are serious accusations, Sheriff. They're serious behaviors. Do you have evidence of any illegal activity? Not yet, but I have a pattern of escalating behavior that needs to stop before it becomes illegal activity. Harold was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. Sheriff, my son is 26 years old. He's entitled to pursue romantic relationships. Not when the woman isn't interested. Not when he's making her afraid. Has Miss Walsh filed a complaint? She's afraid to, because she knows your family's position in this community. I see. Harold stood up.
Sheriff, I appreciate your concern, but unless there's been an actual crime committed, I don't see how this is a police matter. Mr. Washington, I'm trying to handle this quietly, before it becomes something that requires official action. And I appreciate that. But I can't control my adult son's behavior based on vague accusations of impropriety. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Sheriff, you're new to this job. Still learning how things work around here. Let me give you some advice. Be very careful about making enemies you can't afford to have. After he left, I sat in my office and tried to figure out my next move. I could wait for David Washington to cross a legal line and then arrest him. But by then, Jennifer Walsh might be seriously hurt or dead. Or I could follow Tom Brennan's playbook. Find leverage, apply pressure, force a resolution that protected the victim and preserved the peace. But what kind of leverage could I use against the Washington family? The answer came to me that evening as I was reviewing the files in room 12 again. Box 1993-B contained evidence of a hit-and-run accident that had killed a migrant worker named Jose Alvarez. The vehicle involved was a red pickup truck with damage to the front bumper. According to Tom's notes, the truck belonged to Harold Washington's older son, Michael. But Michael had an alibi. He'd been out of town on business when the accident occurred. However, there was a photograph in the file that Tom had never officially processed. A security camera image from a gas station showing the damaged truck being driven by someone who looked an awful lot like Harold Washington himself. Tom's note. Father covered for son by claiming to have borrowed the truck. No way to prove which family member was actually driving without destroying both. Matter closed with compensation to victim's family. But the photograph was still there. Still evidence of a lie that had been told to protect a killer. I made copies of the relevant documents and photographs. Then I called Harold Washington. Mr. Washington, I'd like to meet with you again. This time, I'd like your son David to be present. Sheriff, I thought we'd resolve this matter. We've discussed it. Resolution requires action. What kind of action? The kind that ensures Miss Walsh's safety and your family's continued prosperity. Are you threatening me, Sheriff? I'm offering you the same kind of practical solution that Sheriff Brennan would have offered. There was a long pause. Where would you like to meet? Your office. 1 hour. The Washington Oil Building was the tallest structure in town, all 4 stories of it. Harold Washington's office was on the top floor, with windows overlooking the refinery and half the county. David Washington was waiting when I arrived. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-20s, with the soft look of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. Gentlemen, I said, taking a seat across from them, we need to discuss Miss Walsh. Sheriff, Harold said, my son assures me that he's done nothing inappropriate. Your son's definition of appropriate and mine seem to differ. I placed the folder on the desk between us. Harold's eyes fixed on it immediately. What's that? Evidence from an old case. The death of Jose Alvarez in 1993. Harold's face went pale. That case was closed. The investigation was closed. The evidence was preserved. I opened the folder and showed them the security camera photograph. Harold Washington behind the wheel of his son Michael's damaged truck. This photograph shows you driving the vehicle that killed Mr. Alvarez. The same vehicle your son Michael claimed to be driving at the time of the accident. You can't prove that photograph hasn't been altered. I don't need to prove it. I just need to ask questions about it. Publicly. David was looking back and forth between his father and me, clearly not understanding what was happening. What do you want? Harold asked. I want your son to leave Jennifer Walsh alone. Completely. No more phone calls, no more gifts, no more watching her house. And if he agrees? Then this photograph stays in my evidence locker, where it's been for 30 years. And if he doesn't agree? Then I reopen the Alvarez case and let a jury decide whether this photograph shows evidence of perjury obstruction of justice, and vehicular manslaughter. Harold looked at his son.
David, do you understand what's being discussed here?
No. What does some old accident have to do with Jennifer? It has to do with consequences, I said. Your family has avoided consequences for a long time. That can continue, as long as you understand the terms. What terms? You stay away from Jennifer Walsh. You get help for whatever issues are driving your behavior, and you remember that your actions don't just affect you, they affect your entire family. David looked confused and angry. This is blackmail. This is community management, Harold said quietly. Sheriff, if my son agrees to your terms, what assurance do I have that this matter will remain private? The same assurance Jose Alvarez's family had when they accepted compensation instead of justice. My word.
Harold was quiet for a long time. Then he turned to his son. David, you're going to leave Miss Walsh alone. You're going to get counseling, and you're going to remember that your behavior reflects on this entire family.
Dad.
This is not a negotiation.
David looked like he wanted to argue, but something in his father's voice stopped him. Fine. I'll leave her alone. Counseling, I added, with a licensed therapist, not just family conversations. Agreed, Harold said. I closed the folder and stood up.
Gentlemen, I hope this is the last time we need to have this conversation. Sheriff, Harold said as I reached the door, you've learned Tom Brennan's methods very quickly. I've learned that protecting people sometimes requires using the tools available rather than the tools you wish you had. Over the next few weeks, I kept a close eye on Jennifer Walsh. The phone calls stopped. The unwanted gifts stopped. She seemed more relaxed, more confident. David Washington enrolled in counseling with a therapist in the next county over. According to Frank Espinoza, who had sources everywhere, the sessions were going well. The photograph of Harold Washington went back into Box 1993B, along with all the other evidence that was too dangerous to process but too important to destroy. And I began to understand what Tom Brennan had learned over 37 years of keeping the peace in a place where perfect justice was impossible. Sometimes the best you can do is protect the innocent and manage the dangerous. Sometimes compromise is the only path to safety. And sometimes the weight of keeping a community together requires carrying secrets that would destroy it if they ever saw daylight. 3 months later, I got a call from Jennifer Walsh. Sheriff Caldwell, I wanted to thank you. For what, Miss Walsh? I don't know exactly, but whatever you did, it worked. I feel safe here now. I'm glad to hear that. Sheriff, can I ask you something? Of course. How do you live with the compromises? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, I'm not naive. I know that in a small town, problems sometimes get solved in ways that don't involve courts and lawyers. I know that my safety probably came at some kind of cost. Miss Walsh, I'm not asking for details. I'm asking how you sleep at night, knowing that justice isn't always just. I thought about Tom Brennan, about 37 years of impossible choices and practical solutions. About 18 boxes of evidence that told the story of a community held together by carefully managed compromises. I sleep knowing that good people are safe, I said finally, and I try not to think too hard about the cost of keeping them that way. Is that enough? It has to be. That evening, I went down to room 12 and looked at the 18 boxes that Tom Brennan had left behind. 18 cases where justice had been sacrificed for stability. 18 families who'd accepted compensation instead of prosecution. And I wondered how many more boxes I'd add over the course of my career. How many more impossible choices I'd have to make. The phone on my desk rang. It was Frank Espinoza. Sheriff, we've got a situation out on County Road 15. Domestic dispute. Possible assault. On my way.
I locked room 12 behind me and headed out into the night. Another call, another choice between what was right and what was possible. Another day in Esperanza County, where the past has long roots and the future depends on keeping some secrets buried deep enough that they can't hurt the living. Because that's the thing about being sheriff in a place like this. You don't just enforce the law. You become the custodian of a community's survival. And sometimes that means carrying burdens that would crush a weaker person. Sometimes it means becoming the kind of person you never thought you'd be. But as I drove through the darkness toward whatever crisis was waiting for me, I found myself thinking about Jennifer Walsh sleeping safely in her house on Maple Street. About Maria Santos's mother tending her garden and visiting her daughter's grave every week. About all the people who'd been protected by a system that prioritized their safety over perfect justice. And I realized that Tom Brennan had left me more than just 18 boxes of evidence. He'd left me a choice about what kind of sheriff I wanted to be. What would you do if you inherited a system that protected the innocent by compromising with the guilty? How do you balance justice against survival in a place where the two are incompatible? Because I can tell you from experience, the weight of those choices never gets lighter. You just get stronger at carrying them. I'm Sheriff Dave Torres, and I've been working the night shift in Blackwater County, Texas for 8 years. Population 2,100, most of whom are asleep by 10 p.m. It's quiet work, checking on businesses, responding to the occasional domestic call, making sure the teenagers aren't drinking beer behind the Walmart. But 3 weeks ago, I started noticing something that made my skin crawl every time I thought about it. It started with the children. Not missing children. Nothing that dramatic. Just children who were awake when they shouldn't be. Standing at windows, sitting on porches, always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., always perfectly still, always watching. The first time I saw one, I thought it was my imagination. A small figure at a bedroom window on Cedar Street, backlit by a nightlight. But when I slowed down to get a better look, the figure was gone. The second time was 3 nights later. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, sitting on the front steps of a house on Oak Avenue. She was wearing pajamas and had her arms wrapped around her knees. I pulled over and got out of my patrol car. "Hey there, sweetheart. What are you doing outside so late?" She looked at me with the kind of calm that doesn't belong on a child's face at 3 a.m. "Waiting," she said. "Waiting for what?" "For him to come back." "Who's him?" "The man who visits." A chill ran down my spine. "What man?" But when I blinked, she was gone. Just vanished, like she'd never been there at all. I knocked on the door of the house. Mrs. Patterson answered after a few minutes, looking confused and worried. "Sheriff Torres? What's wrong?" "Ma'am, I saw a little girl on your front steps. Is everything okay?" "A little girl? Sheriff, I don't have any children, and I've been asleep for hours." I looked back at the front steps. Empty. No sign that anyone had been sitting there. "Mrs. Patterson, do you live alone?" "Yes, since my husband died 2 years ago." "Sheriff, are you feeling all right?" I was starting to wonder the same thing. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw them everywhere. Children standing in yards, children at windows, children sitting on curbs and playground equipment. Always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Always watching, and always gone when I tried to approach them. I started keeping a log. Date, time, location, description. Within 10 days, I'd recorded 23 sightings across 12 different streets. But here's the thing that really bothered me. I'd lived in Blackwater County my entire life. I knew every family, every child. And the faces I was seeing didn't belong to any kids in town. They looked familiar, but in a way that made my stomach turn. Like I was seeing echoes of children I'd known long ago. Then I started researching.
I went through newspaper archives, old school records, anything that might give me a clue about who these children were. And slowly, a pattern emerged. Timothy Morrison, age 7. Disappeared from his backyard in 1987. Never found. Sarah Chen, age 9. Last seen walking home from school in 1991. Never found. Marcus Williams, age 6. Vanished from a family camping trip in 1995. Never found. 7 children total, spanning 15 years. All between the ages of 5 and 10. All from Blackwater County. All missing without a trace. And all matching the faces I'd been seeing on my night patrols. I brought the files to my partner, Deputy Linda Martinez. Linda's been with the department longer than me, worked with my predecessor, Sheriff Hawkins. Linda, what do you know about these missing children cases? She looked through the files, and I watched her face go pale. Dave, where did you get these? Archives, cold case files. Linda, what aren't you telling me? She was quiet for a long time. Then she closed the files and looked me in the eye. These cases, Sheriff Hawkins always said they were connected. Said there was someone in the county who was taking children. Did he have a suspect? He had suspicions, but he could never prove anything. Who? Dave. Some doors are better left closed. Not when children are involved. Linda sighed. Old man Brennan. Lives out on Farm Road 1247. Big property. Lots of outbuildings. Hawkins searched it twice. Never found anything. But he suspected? Hawkins said Brennan had a way of knowing things he shouldn't know. About the families. About when children would be alone. Why didn't he arrest him? No evidence. No bodies. No witnesses. Just a feeling. And now? Now you're seeing things that shouldn't be there. That night, I drove out to Farm Road 1247. The Brennan property was about 12 acres of scrubland and old buildings. The main house was dark, but I could see light coming from one of the outbuildings. I parked about a quarter mile away and walked in on foot. The building with the light was an old barn, maybe 50 yards from the main house. As I got closer, I could hear sounds coming from inside. Not quite voices, but something like conversation. I peered through a crack in the wooden siding. What I saw inside made my blood freeze. 7 children sitting in a circle on the dirt floor. The same children I'd been seeing on my patrols. They were talking in low voices, but I couldn't make out the words. In the center of the circle was an old man. Brennan, I assumed. He was showing them something. Photographs, it looked like. These are the new ones, he was saying. The ones we need to watch. The children leaned forward, studying the photographs. The boy on Maple Street, one of them said. He walks home alone. The girl on Pine Avenue, said another. Her parents work late. They were discussing other children, living children. I backed away from the barn and ran to my patrol car, called for backup, then drove back to the main road to wait. But when Deputy Martinez arrived with 2 state troopers, the barn was empty. No children, no old man, no photographs. Just an empty building that smelled of dust and motor oil. Dave, there's nothing here, Linda said after we'd searched the entire property. They were here. I saw them. I believe you, but there's no evidence. We checked the main house. Brennan was there, asleep in his bed. Claimed he'd been home all evening, hadn't heard anything unusual. Sheriff, he said when we questioned him, I'm 78 years old. I go to bed at 9 and sleep like the dead. He looked so ordinary, so harmless. The kind of elderly man you'd help carry groceries to his car. But his eyes... There was something in his eyes that made my skin crawl. The next morning, I called the families of the missing children. Asked if they'd ever had contact with Brennan. Mrs. Morrison, Timothy's mother. Oh yes, Mr. Brennan was very kind to us after Timothy disappeared. brought us food, helped with the search. Mrs. Chen, Sarah's mother. He was wonderful, so supportive during those terrible weeks. Mr. Williams, Marcus's father.
Brennan? Sure, he was at all the search parties. Really seemed to care about finding Marcus. He'd inserted himself into every investigation, been close to every family, had access to information about their routines, their vulnerabilities. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened next. 2 days after our search of the Brennan property, I got a call. "Sheriff Torres, this is Janet Murphy. My son didn't come home from school today." I felt my stomach drop. "How old is your son, Mrs. Murphy?" "8. His name is Kyle. He usually walks home, but I'll be right there." Kyle Murphy lived on Maple Street, the same street where I'd seen one of the phantom children pointing. We searched for 6 hours, found Kyle's backpack about half a mile from his house, but no sign of Kyle himself. That night, I drove past the Brennan property again. The barn was dark, but I could see movement in the shadows. I called Linda. "Meet me at Farm Road 1247 and bring everyone we can spare." This time, we didn't announce ourselves. We surrounded the property and moved in quietly. The barn door was open. Inside, 8 children sat in a circle, 7 familiar faces and 1 new one. Kyle Murphy. But Kyle wasn't a phantom. He was real, solid, terrified. Tears streaming down his face as the other children whispered to him. "Welcome to the family," one of them was saying. "Don't be scared. It gets easier." I burst through the door, weapon drawn. "Everyone freeze!" The phantom children looked at me with those same calm expressions I'd seen on my patrols. But Kyle scrambled to his feet and ran toward me. "Sheriff, help me!" I grabbed Kyle and pulled him behind me. "Where's Brennan?" "Right here, Sheriff." I spun around. The old man was standing in the doorway, blocking our exit. "Mr. Brennan, you're under arrest." "For what? Talking to children?" "For kidnapping. For the disappearance of 7 children over 15 years. He smiled. "Prove it." I looked back at the other children. They were still sitting in their circle, watching us with those unnaturally calm expressions. "These children are evidence." "What children?" I looked again. The circle was empty, just Kyle and me and the old man. "They were right here." "I don't see anyone but you, me and the boy." Kyle was clinging to my leg, sobbing. "They were talking to me. The dead kids. They said I was going to join them." "Imagination," Brennan said. "Children have such active imaginations." But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew Kyle wasn't imagining anything. We arrested Brennan, but the case fell apart almost immediately. No evidence of the other children, no bodies on his property, just his word against Kyle's about what had happened in the barn. Kyle insisted he'd been grabbed on his way home from school, brought to the barn, and told he was going to join the family. But a good defense lawyer could explain that away as trauma-induced fantasy. Brennan was released on his own recognizance. 2 weeks later, Kyle Murphy disappeared again. This time, we searched the Brennan property with ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and a team of state investigators. Found nothing. But that night, on my patrol, I saw 8 children standing in windows and sitting on porches. 7 familiar faces, and 1 new one. Kyle Murphy. I tried to approach him, but like the others, he vanished when I got close. The next morning, I put in for a transfer to the day shift, because some things are too dangerous to see, and some knowledge is too heavy to carry. But even now, 3 months later, I sometimes drive past those streets during my lunch break, and sometimes, just for a second, I think I see them. 8 children who should be playing in schoolyards or sleeping in their beds. Instead, they're watching, waiting, looking for the next child who walks home alone. What would you do if you saw the ghosts of missing children? Would you try to save them, or would you run? Because I can tell you from experience, sometimes running is the only sane option.
even when it means leaving others behind. I'm Sheriff Jake Ramirez, and I've been keeping the peace in Sutton County, Texas for 6 years. We've got about 1,800 people spread across 1,400 square miles of ranch land. So most days I'm dealing with cattle disputes, the occasional DUI, and making sure tourists don't get themselves killed taking selfies with rattlesnakes. But last month, I got involved in something that still keeps me awake at nights. It started with a property dispute. The Hartwell Ranch and the Morrison place share about 12 miles of fence line along County Road 78. Both families have been here for 4 generations, and they've been arguing about that fence line for just as long. Usually it's petty stuff. Morrison claims Hartwell's cattle are grazing on his land. Hartwell says Morrison's water pumps are affecting his well pressure. Normal neighbor disputes that get settled with handshakes and beer. But this time was different. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Martha Morrison, voice shaking, saying someone had cut her fence line and left something horrible on her property. "Sheriff Ramirez, you need to come out here right away." "What kind of something, Mrs. Morrison?" I can't describe it over the phone. Just please come." I drove out to the Morrison place expecting to find vandalism, maybe some teenage prank. The Morrison property is beautiful in that harsh Texas way. Rolling hills covered with mesquite and prickly pear, broken by dry creek beds and limestone outcrops. Martha Morrison met me at her front gate. She's a tough woman in her 60s, has been running cattle since her husband died 8 years ago. It takes a lot to shake her. But she was shaking now. "It's about half a mile out," she said, getting into my patrol car. "Along the fence line with the Hartwell place." We drove out across the pasture, following a dirt track that led toward the property line. The fence was standard ranch fencing, 3 strands of barbed wire strung between cedar posts. About halfway along the fence line, I could see where it had been cut. Clean cuts, like someone had used wire cutters. But that wasn't what had shaken Martha Morrison. Hanging from the fence posts were what looked like scarecrows, 5 of them spaced about 20 yards apart. Crude figures made from old clothes stuffed with straw or grass. But as we got closer, I realized they weren't scarecrows. They were effigies, human figures, complete with faces made from burlap sacks and painted features. And each one was wearing clothes that looked personal. Not generic scarecrow rags, but actual clothing that someone had worn. "Mrs. Morrison, do you recognize any of these clothes?" She nodded, pointing to the figure closest to us. "That's my husband's work shirt, the blue one with the tear in the sleeve." "How do you know?" "Because I buried him in it." I felt my blood run cold. "Ma'am, are you saying someone dug up your husband's grave?" "I'm saying that shirt was in his casket 6 feet underground in Sutton County Cemetery." I looked at the other figures, an old woman in a floral dress, a man in overalls, a young woman in a wedding dress that had yellowed with age. "Mrs. Morrison, do you know who these other people are supposed to represent?" "That one in the dress," she said, pointing to the woman in overalls. "Looks like my grandmother. She died in 1987. "And the others?" I think they're all people who used to live on this land." I called in backup and a crime scene team. While we waited, Martha told me the history of the property. "This land has been in my family since 1923, she said. "My great-grandfather bought it from a family named Brennan who'd been here since the 1880s. "What happened to the Brennans?" "They died out. Disease, accidents, just bad luck. By 1920, there was only one left, an old woman named Clara. She sold to my great-grandfather and moved away." "Anyone else die on this property?" "Over the years, sure. My grandmother died in the house in 1987, my grandfather in 1991, my husband had his heart attack in the South Pasture in 2015. "What about before your family owned it?" "I don't know much about that, but there are some old graves on the property. pre-cemetery burials from when this was frontier land. I was starting to get a picture that I didn't like. The crime scene team arrived around noon. They photographed everything, collected the effigies, took samples from the fence posts. "Sheriff," said crime scene tech Williams, "these clothes, they're old. I mean really old. Some of them look like they've been buried for decades. Any way to tell where they came from? We'll run tests, but if they came from graves, we should be able to tell from soil samples and decomposition patterns." That evening, I drove over to the Hartwell place to ask if they'd seen anything unusual. Bill Hartwell is about the same age as Martha Morrison, runs about twice as much land with the help of his 3 sons. He's always been a good neighbor, despite the ongoing fence disputes. "Sheriff Ramirez," he said when I knocked on his door. "This about whatever happened over at Martha's place? You heard about it?" "Hard not to. Crime scene van, 3 patrol cars. What kind of trouble is Martha in?" "She's not in trouble. Someone vandalized her fence line, cut the wire and left some disturbing items." "What kind of items?" I described the effigies without going into too much detail about the clothing. Bill's face went pale. "Jesus, Sheriff, that's sick. Did you see anyone on your property last night? Any vehicles that didn't belong?" "No, but..." He paused, thinking. "There was something. Around midnight, maybe later. I heard digging." "Digging?" Sounded like someone with a shovel, but it was coming from the old cemetery. "What old cemetery?" "There's a family plot about a mile from the fence line. Been there since before my grandfather bought this place. 5 or 6 graves, all from the 1800s. Can you show me?" We drove out to the cemetery in Bill's pickup truck. It was on a small rise overlooking the creek, surrounded by a low stone wall that had partially collapsed over the years. The graves were marked with simple headstones, most of them worn smooth by a century of Texas weather. But I could make out some of the names and dates. Clara Brennan, 1847 to 1919. Samuel Brennan, 1845-1898. Mary Brennan, 1823-1887. And 3 more graves that had been disturbed recently. The earth was loose, and I could see where someone had been digging. "Bill, these are the Brennan family graves?" "Far as I know, they owned this land before my family bought it." I called crime scene tech Williams again. "I need you out at the Hartwell property. We've got disturbed graves." "How disturbed?" "Someone's been digging them up." 2 hours later, Williams confirmed what I'd suspected. 3 graves had been opened, the contents removed. "Sheriff, this isn't just vandalism. This is desecration of human remains. That's a felony." "Any idea who might have done it?" "Well, the interesting thing is, whoever did this knew exactly where to dig. These graves are over 100 years old, and the markers are barely readable. Someone would have to know the exact locations. Someone familiar with the property, or someone with access to old records." That night, I went home and did some research. Sutton County has pretty good records going back to the 1870s, and I wanted to know more about the Brennan family. What I found made my skin crawl. The Brennans had owned about 3,000 acres along what is now County Road 78. According to newspaper accounts from the 1890s, they were unusual people. Strange accidents happened on their property. Travelers who stopped for water and were never seen again. Neighbors who went missing during boundary disputes. In 1898, Samuel Brennan was found dead in his barn, apparently kicked by a horse. But according to the newspaper account, several neighbors reported that Samuel had been threatening to call up the old spirits to protect his land. Mary Brennan died in 1887 under mysterious circumstances. The doctor listed cause of death as fever, but witnesses reported that she'd been talking to dead relatives for weeks before she died. Clara Brennan, the last of the family, lived alone for 30 years after her relatives died. Neighbors reported seeing lights in the cemetery at night, hearing voices coming from the graves. When she finally sold the land and moved away in 1923, She allegedly told the new owners that the dead don't like to be forgotten. I was beginning to think someone had taken that warning seriously. The next morning, I got another call from Martha Morrison. "Sheriff, they're back." "What's back?" "The figures, on the fence line." I drove out to the Morrison place immediately. Sure enough, there were new effigies hanging from the fence posts. But these were different. Instead of old burial clothes, these figures were wearing modern clothing, recent clothing. "Mrs. Morrison, do you recognize these clothes?" She nodded, her face pale. "That's my work shirt, the one I wore yesterday." I looked more closely. It was indeed a shirt I'd seen Martha wearing the day before, but now it was hanging from a fence post, stuffed with straw to make a crude human figure. "How is that possible? Where did you leave the shirt?" "In my laundry basket, inside my house." "Has anyone been in your house?" "Not that I know of. But Sheriff, that's not the worst part." "What's the worst part?" She pointed to the other figures. "Those are clothes from other people in the county. I recognize that dress. It belongs to Sarah Chen, who lives in town. And those overalls belong to Pete Williams." I counted the figures. 8 of them, all wearing clothes that belonged to living people in Sutton County. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to need you to call those people. Find out if they're missing any clothing." Over the next hour, we confirmed that 8 different people were missing items of clothing. Shirts, dresses, pants, all taken from laundry baskets, closets, or clotheslines. "Sheriff," Martha said, "what kind of person steals clothes just to make scarecrows?" I was wondering the same thing. But I was also wondering something else. How did someone know exactly which clothes belonged to which people? And how did they get access to homes and property all over the county? That afternoon, I got a call that made everything worse. "Sheriff Ramirez, this is Dr. Patricia Santos at the county medical clinic. We've got a situation here." "What kind of situation?" "Pete Williams came in complaining of chest pains. But Sheriff, there's something strange about him." "Strange how?" "He says he can hear his dead father talking to him. Says his father is angry about something that happened to his clothes." I felt a chill run down my spine. "I'll be right there." Pete Williams was sitting in the clinic waiting room when I arrived. He looked pale and confused, like someone coming out of a fever dream. "Pete, Dr. Santos says you've been having some unusual experiences." "Sheriff, I know how this sounds, but I swear I can hear my dad's voice. He died 12 years ago, but I can hear him clear as day." "What's he saying?" "He's angry. Says someone disturbed his rest. Says the dead are walking because someone broke the boundary." "What boundary?" "I don't know, but Sheriff, it's not just me. I talked to Sarah Chen this morning and she says she's been hearing voices too. Her grandmother who died 15 years ago." I spent the rest of the day checking on the other people whose clothes had been stolen. 7 of the 8 reported similar experiences. Hearing voices of dead relatives, feeling like they were being watched, having dreams about the cemetery. The 8th person was Martha Morrison. "I haven't heard anything," she told me when I asked. "But, Sheriff, I feel like someone's watching me, especially at night." "From where?" "From the fence line, like there's someone standing out there in the dark." That evening, I decided to stake out the Morrison property. If someone was coming back to leave more effigies, I wanted to catch them in the act. I parked about half a mile away and walked to a position where I could watch the fence line without being seen. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see clearly. Around midnight, I saw movement near the fence posts, figures walking along the fence line. But they weren't carrying anything, weren't hanging new effigies. They were just walking, back and forth along the boundary between the 2 properties. I counted 7 figures. Men, women, different ages. They moved slowly, deliberately, like they were patrolling the area. I called for backup, then moved closer to get a better look. As I got within about 50 yards, I could see the figures more clearly. They were wearing the burial clothes that had been stolen from the graves. The old work shirts, the faded dresses, the formal suits that people had been buried in over a century ago. But their faces were wrong. Partially decomposed, but still moving, still showing expression. And they were all looking in the same direction, toward the Morrison house. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at the Morrison property immediately." "Sheriff, what's your situation?" I've got multiple subjects trespassing on private property." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't accurate. These weren't trespassers. These were something else entirely. The figures stopped walking and turned toward me. 7 pairs of dead eyes staring directly at me. Then they started moving in my direction. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran like hell back to my patrol car and got the fuck out of there. Backup arrived 20 minutes later, but by then the fence line was empty. No figures, no signs that anyone had been there. But the effigies were gone. All of them. Just empty fence posts stretching along the property line. The next morning, I called the Texas Rangers, explained the situation as best I could without sounding completely insane. "Sheriff Ramirez," said Ranger Captain Williams, "what exactly are you asking us to investigate?" "Grave robbing, desecration of human remains, theft of personal property." "And the other aspects of your report?" "I'm not sure how to classify those." "Well, let's focus on the crimes we can prove. We'll send a team down to investigate the disturbed graves." The Rangers arrived that afternoon with a team of forensic investigators. They spent 3 days examining the cemetery, the fence line, and the stolen clothing. Their final report was frustratingly inconclusive. Evidence supports grave robbing and theft of personal property. No fingerprints or DNA evidence recovered. No witnesses to the actual crimes. Recommend continued investigation by local authorities. No mention of the figures I'd seen walking along the fence line. But the strangest thing happened after the Rangers left. The voices stopped. Pete Williams, Sarah Chen, and the others stopped hearing their dead relatives. The feeling of being watched faded. The county seemed to return to normal. Except for one thing. Martha Morrison called me a week later. "Sheriff, I wanted to thank you." "For what, Mrs. Morrison?" "For whatever you did. The property feels peaceful now. Like whatever was disturbed has been put to rest." "I didn't do anything, ma'am." "Maybe not. But something changed. I can feel it. I never did figure out who robbed those graves or why. Never caught whoever was stealing clothing and making effigies. But I learned something about the land around here, about the weight of history and the importance of respecting the dead, and I learned that some property disputes go deeper than fence lines and water rights. Sometimes they go all the way down to the bones. What would you do if the dead started walking your property line? Would you try to stop them? Or would you just hope they eventually found their way back to where they belonged? Because I can tell you from experience, some boundaries are more important than others, and some you don't cross no matter what the law says you can do.